I urge us all to remain focused on the overarching objectives of this retreat, which include developing an aid memoir to guide engagement with the P5, other UN member states, and interest groups within the IGN process, formulating a clear roadmap of activities with specific timelines and benchmarks for advancing the Common African Position and enhancing our engagement with strategic partners. Strategically preparing for the presentation of the Common African Position as a model for African Union member states during the IGN in the 79th session of the General Assembly, and enhancing the model for future dialogues, crafting concise messaging for inclusion in statement by African Union member states at the 80th United Nations General Assembly High-Level Week, and in other relevant multilateral fora, and following up on the ministerial level meeting with the P5, and considering the possibility of a heads of state engagement aimed at deepening support for the Common African Position and reinforcing Africa's unified stance. I extend my profound gratitude to all C10 member states for their unwavering commitments to the advancement of our shared continental interest. Your consistent support and active engagement are critical to the success of our collective endeavor. On behalf of His Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I once again extend a very warm welcome to all our distinguished guests and delegates. May your time in Freetown be not only productive, but also deeply enriching. Let us together carry forward a spirit of unity, dignity, and resilience that define our continent. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you to the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation for setting the stage of what this retreat is going to look like and why we are here. I would now call on His Excellency Salem Musba Mohammed, Representative of Political Affairs, Peace and Security, the African Union.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me at the outset to express our appreciation and thanks to the government of Sierra Leone for hosting this important and timely retreat of the ambassadors and PRs of the African Union Committee of 10 heads of state and government on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, Addis Ababa and in New York. I wish to deliver the following remarks on behalf of His Excellency Ambassador Mankula Adoy, African Union Commissioner for Political Affairs and Peace and Security, and I quote, I thank the coordinator of the African Union Committee of 10, His Excellency Mr. Madabo, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, for taking the lead of this important mechanism. I wish to recall the African Union Committee of 10 heads of state and government on the United Nations Security Council reform held its recent meeting at the sidelines of the 38th Ordinary Session of the African Union Assembly in February 2025. During the said summit, our heads of state and government, in their wisdom, reviewed the activities of the C10 on United Nations Security Council reform. They noted the continued support for the Common African Position by many UN member states and re-emphasized the need for African countries to stay united on the reform of the Security Council and for Africa to speak with one voice during this process. The objectives of our retreat today, in short, to strategize and strengthen our common engagement, continued commitment, and build a robust coalition to make the aspiration of our continent in the United Nations Security Council reform. Excellencies, despite all these tremendous and tireless efforts, the Security Council reform process, starting from the open-ended working group till the IGN process, does not see significant substantial progress. We have to acknowledge that today we need to act beyond the classical stand to move our project forward. The African Union has been a fundamental actor in the enforcement of peace and security in the continent. However, the challenges posed by Africa's limited representation in the United Nations Security Council restricted the ability of the African Union to deliver active and concrete conflict resolution. The quest of United Nations Security Council reform is a legitimate demand as we make efforts to support conflict resolution in Africa. It is impossible to disassociate it from the UN peace operations largely concentrated on the continent and implemented by Security Council. Reforming the Security Council is not only urgent but essential for the future of the United Nations and global governance. The current structure, characterized by inequities and the lack of democratic representation, undermines the credibility, effectiveness, and legitimacy of the Security Council. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa has overcome numerous challenges in the past from which the continent can gain lessons as it gears up to build the Africa we want and the Africa we deserve. We have overcome civil wars. We silenced colonial guns and apartheid through colonization. We survived the brutal ideological divide in the forms of the Cold War, which in Africa became a hot war. By all indications, Africa has made progress. In fact, even the most severe critics of our continent have admitted this progress. Despite this progress, many African countries are still facing different forms and manifestations of terrorism, as well as transnational organized crimes, such as human trafficking and drug trafficking, piracy, and the illicit proliferations of arms. That's why we support any efforts to maintain peace and security in Africa. These efforts are guided by our common resolve to strengthen the presence of Africa in the international fora and by building partnerships, solidarity, and friendships among our countries and with other countries of the world. Excellency, after 20 years of debate, and I wish to add that a life 20 years is the year when one is finally considered as a legal adult. It is now high time for us to come up with a new resulted-based approach, especially as everyone agrees on three key facts: that Africa deserves to have full membership at the United Nations Security Council, not least because of the number of African member states that make up United Nations General Membership. Second, the sheer size of population in Africa. And thirdly, more than 60% of the Council's business is exclusively on and about African issues. In addition, our full membership to G20 is an acknowledgement by the international community that legitimately should lead to full membership of the United Nations Security Council. Excellencies, our call for comprehensive reform is a demand for fairness and a necessary step toward achieving a truly equitable international governance structure. By expanding the Security Council's membership at least to 26 seats, we can ensure that Africa is adequately represented. Excellencies, we must remain mindful that Africa and African people are waiting impatiently for a meaningful reform of the United Nations Security Council to meet the realities of the world today. That's why efforts shall continue to achieve this goal to secure the demands of Africa as articulated in the Leone Consensus and CERT Declaration, 2 permanent and 2 non-permanent seats in the Security Council. This can never be reached if we don't remain unified and independent. End of quote. I wish full success for the retreat. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for joining your voice to the fact that we need to unite and work together. We want to thank you. We're going to have a statement now by His Excellency Leone, Chief of the Cabinet of the President in the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly.
Excellency, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to address you today on behalf of the President of the United Nations General Assembly, Article 17. Let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to the government of Sierra Leone for its generous support facilitating my attendance. It is very important. The President of the General Assembly is very interested in this process for a number of reasons. One, he is an African. He is the candidate that the continent put on this seat. Two, upon assuming his functions, he made Africa a priority. Priority in all domains. Either we're talking of development, that is why development is working very hard to position Africa as a force in the negotiation of the upcoming summit on financing for development in Sevilla, Spain, in July. He would also be organizing in the coming weeks an interactive dialogue at the General Assembly focusing on peace and security in Africa, and in particular at how African Union-led peace operations can be financed through the regular budget of the United Nations in accordance with the Security Council resolution adopted in 2023, which has not materialized, and this is the moment. Since Africa has the presidency, we have to do everything that is possible. On the political sphere, the president is very committed the C10 process. He was with you, Mr. President, in Addis, February, when you had a summit there, made a contribution to that. He has asked me to come here and share his views with you and encourage you in this process. Calls for reform of the Security Council are growing both louder and very urgent because of the circumstances the international community, the world is experiencing. The urgency becomes all the more pronounced as the Council remains deadlocked in response to conflicts around the world, including those on the African continent. As you know, the Council adopted a resolution which is called the Veto Initiative, which allowed the General Assembly to take over debate when a veto is passed in the Security Council. This reinforced role of the General Assembly is very much part of the reform process that is underway. The Council must be able and willing to deliver on its mandate of ensuring peace and security across the world. The critical element of that is delivering reform that reflects greater representation. In September last year, world leaders gathered in New York and adopted an important document, second only to the Charter of the United Nations. That document is the pact for the future. And as we heard His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Sierra Leone, referring to that, it marked the first time the international community explicitly asks that Africa needs to be compensated for the historical injustices that it's been victim to. So the pact lays out a vision to revitalize multilateralism and build a fairer, more equitable world. Delivering on that vision requires confronting and correcting the injustices of the past. So in that spirit, the pact affirms the historical injustices committed against Africa and the urgent need to address them. The Security Council and the injustices there on Africa is just one area. Our continent has suffered many injustices. But we are here to look at that injustice regarding the Security Council. Because when the United Nations was founded in 1945, Africa was denied proper representation on the Security Council. That wrong was not corrected. When the Council was even expanded in 1965, even though in 1965 there were many African countries that had gained independence, but that wrong wasn't corrected. Africa must play a more visible and influential role in Council's work. And like my friend from the UN Commission, AU Commission just underlined, most of the work of the Council is on Africa. More than 60% of the work of the Council is on Africa. The momentum generated, therefore, by the Pact for the Future has breathed new life into the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform. The President of the General Assembly, who has sent me here, is the custodian of this process. the intergovernmental negotiation on the council. And as an African, he wants things to happen for this country. Those negotiations are now focused on producing a consolidated model with a written proposal that clearly defines the role Africa must assume on the Council. And the President is bent on having this happen by September 2025. But the Chair cannot move forward with a consolidated model without from Africa. The Chair is the ambassador of Kuwait. There were two, Austria, but now it's just Kuwait. Just before I left New York, I had extensive meeting, and I would later in my presentation tell you what is not coming. Time is of the essence, as the President of the General Assembly emphasized during his meeting with the heads of state of the Committee of 10 in Addis in February on the margins of the 38th session of the African Union. That meeting, held under the chairmanship of His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, reflected a shared agreement among all participants on the urgent need for reform. The President is hopeful that meaningful action to advance Africa's position on the Council will be taken during this 79th session of the General Assembly. But that cannot happen without you, members of the C10. It cannot happen. So I strongly urge you to seize every opportunity to agree on an African model. It's the way to go. There are already a number of models that have been submitted to us, and Africa is not there, and Africa is the one that needs it the most. And from the vantage point where we sit, we believe that the world cannot recognize the historical injustice that has been levied on the continent, and we don't seize the opportunity to hold the world accountable, to hold the world by what it has said and make things happen. So the model should be one that can be submitted to the membership as part of the intergovernmental negotiation during this session. Let me assure you, the President of the General Assembly stands ready to support this process, including through informal discussions with Africa and other member states. That support extends to the upcoming ministerial level meeting in Zambia in June. Indeed, when the President met with the C10 ambassadors in New York, many of you were there, this was in March, several important points were raised. One, that this is not only Africa's burden to carry. Two, that all member states share responsibility for correcting this historical injustice. Three, that greater clarity is needed on how others will support Africa in the context of any reform. Even so, I believe Africa can take a major leadership role in Council reform this year, not by waiting for others to act, but by showing boldness. Well, a common model and placing faith in the process, just as was done with the Zulwini Consensus and the State Declaration, which called for Africa to be granted permanent seats, 5 non-permanent seats on the Security Council. Let Africa take up pen. Let Africa shape its own future and contribute decisively to global peace and security. I am here to listen on how the President and his office can best support you in realizing these ends. But let me add that the President has a number of initiatives to support you. In the coming weeks, he will be meeting with the P5, individually and collectively, to continue to plead the Africa case, to hold them accountable to the admission that has been inscribed in the Pact for the Future. And he is doing so because he has also started the implementation of the Pact for the Future. Some of you who are in New York probably participated in the first interactive dialogue in March, which brought the entire 193 countries to reflect on the means of implementation of the Pact. Next month, on the 19th, he will be bringing the entire membership again to reflect on the measurability of the implementation of the Pact. And therein lies Action 40, which meets the historical injustice on the continent and how things can happen. The President of the General Assembly has also requested the facilitator, the chair of the intergovernmental negotiation process, to produce even a draft consolidated model before September. And this is going to happen, and we hope, we count you, seated members, to make this happen by contributing to this process, because as we have heard the two speakers before me emphasize on unity, and unity is needed. Africa has what it needs for this model. Africa has a sealed declaration, the Leone consensus, Oyala, everything is there. It's just for you to put it together. And I believe that from the vantage point of being in the office of the President of the General Assembly, dealing with all member states on this particular issue, the time has come for Africa to seize the momentum and make good use of it. And talking about unity, yes, unity is good. We must make good use of what we have. But like Daniel Defoe said, it is in vain to sit still and wish for what cannot be had. We must act. The moment is now. Conditions are right for it. We've been talking to key member states. They are all favoring Africa. We just need to look for ways to be bold and move ahead. Excellencies, you are not alone in this process. We are galvanizing support out there for this action you're going to take, and we really hope that this meeting here in Sierra Leone, here in this beautiful city of Freetown, will produce very forward-looking outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cabinet. One thing that runs through all the speakers is that first, there's a need to correct the injustices of the past of African representation on the Security Council. There is a need and a call for unity, and the time to act is now. So the ball is in our court, everything is ready. Africa, we have to move to get this done. This is a high point of this occasion, where we get a keynote address and the opening of the retreat by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, Dr. Julius Adabio, and I'm honored and privileged to invite him to make his welcome statement.
Let's sit down, please. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, representative of the political affairs, peace and security of the African Union Commission, the Chief Minister and Ministers of Government, honorable members of Parliament present here today, Chef the Cabinet, Office of the President of the UN General Assembly, C10 permanent representatives in Addis Ababa and New York, members of the diplomatic and consular corps present in Sierra Leone, resident in Sierra Leone, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm delighted to warmly welcome all of you to Freetown, the capital of the Republic of Sierra Leone, your home for the next few days as you come of the permanent representatives of the African Union Committee of 10 on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, commonly called C10. I wish to express on behalf of the government and people of Sierra Leone my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for honoring our collective responsibility to advance Africa into concrete action. Under Sierra Leone's presidency of the United Nations Security Council in August 2024, we convened a historic high-level debate on addressing historic injustice and enhancing Africa's effective representation in the Security Council. This was the first time the Council itself squarely addressed the question of structural reform and Africa's exclusion. The debate galvanized awareness about the urgency of correcting the historical injustice against Africa in less than a month after the historic debate. In the General Assembly, the C10 again held a high-level ministerial meeting with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. That frank and direct engagement provided a critical platform to reinforce our position that Africa's case in this reform is unique and urgent. We made it clear to our P5 counterparts that Africa must be treated as a special case, given the magnitude of its historical underrepresentation. At the UN Summit of the Future in September 2024, world leaders adopted the landmark pact for the future. For the first time ever, a consensus document of all UN member states explicitly acknowledged the need to redress the historical injustice done to Africa with regard to Security Council representation. This was a milestone in our journey, an encouraging sign that the international community recognizes Africa's rightful demand for representation. These developments signal that we stand at a defining moment in our pursuit of global equity. The world has indeed begun to listen to the mistake and the future of the Security Council. But acknowledgement, no matter how welcome, is not enough. We must be clear-eyed. It must lead to tangible action. The commitment and declarations we have garnered from the halls of the United Nations to the chambers of the African Union now present a rare and timely opportunity to translate words into actions. In essence, the next phase of this historic journey must be about implementation and results. 20 years after the adoption of both the Ezowini Consensus and SART Declaration. Therefore, even as we welcome the growing support, the fundamental facts that drive our cause remain unchanged and undeniable. Africa, despite being the third largest continent by population and accounting for more than a quarter of the United Nations member states, remains the most underrepresented region in the Security Council. This is not merely a political oversight, it is a profound historical injustice that continues to undermine the principles of equitable geographical representation as enshrined in the UN Charter. We are therefore asking for not for special favors, but for rectification of a glaring imbalance. The scale and uniqueness of this injustice make Africa a special case that must be addressed as a matter of priority and urgency in any credible reform of the Council. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this retreat is therefore of critical importance as we gather here in Freetown as C10 permanent representatives from Addis Ababa and New York. The objective is to consolidate, harmonize, and energize our collective efforts for the decisive stage ahead. We must emerge from these 2 days of deliberation with a clear plan of action and renewed consensus on the way forward. In particular, the task is to develop 3 documents that will sharpen our diplomatic toolkits and reinforce the common African position. Namely, an African Union model for a reformed Security Council capturing our vision of an enlarged council with Africa as a rightful representation. A strategic roadmap, which is the next, detailing activities and engagements to advance the common African position in all fora, ensuring that our advocacy is sustained and coordinated. And finally, a detailed aid memoir to guide our diplomatic outreach, a reference document that will succinctly present our case and the rationale for the common African position to be used in our engagements. By the end of this retreat, ladies and gentlemen, these outputs, our model, roadmap, aid manual, should equip the C10 to approach the coming phase with greater coherence and persuasiveness. Just as importantly, this gathering should strengthen our unity of purpose at all levels, so that As we leave Freetown, we do so speaking with one voice, louder and clearer than ever before. C10 ambassadors, allow me to highlight 5 key imperatives that should guide your deliberations and actions moving forward. First, as C10, you must reinforce internal unity, which has been alluded to by many here, and coherence. The strength of our voice in the international forum, particularly during intergovernmental negotiations, the IGN, on the Security Council reform, depends on how cohesively and consistently we speak as one. A divided front would only weaken our moral and political advantage. Please stick together. You must therefore continue to present a united, indivisible stance behind the common African position. Second, you must be strategic in your diplomatic engagement. This means crafting and executing comprehensive outreach strategy supported by aid memoir for engaging with P5 and other UN member states and key stakeholders. We should tailor and target our approach to each audience, build a bridge where there may be resistance, and appeal to our partners' own commitment to the principle of justice and equity. Strategic diplomacy, being smart, targeted, and proactive will be essential to gain greater support for our cause. Third, you must reflect on how best to present the position, the common African position, during the upcoming session of the IGN, and indeed in the lead up to the 80th UN General Assembly High-Level Week in 2025. Our narrative must be firm, forward-looking, and compelling. We should emphasize not only what Africa stands to gain, but how a reformed council benefits the entire international system. In every forum, you must be articulate and persuasive that reform is long overdue and that Africa's inclusion will enhance the Council's legitimacy and effectiveness. Fourth, let us not lose sight of the substantive content of the reform we seek. Africa is not asking for more than it deserves. We are simply asking for what any continent with our population and contribution, as already alluded to by many speakers, stake in a global peace and security is due. In line with the Ezowini consensus in that declaration, we demand 2 permanent seats on the Reformed Council with all the rights and privileges of current permanent members, including the right veto if it continues to exist, and at least 5 non-permanent seats for Africa. This is nothing more than what fairness in global decision-making demands. Our partners must understand that Africa's ask is reasonable, just, non-negotiable in its fundamentals. Fifth, we must prepare for sustained high-level engagement, including at the level of heads of state and government. The success of any effort will depend on continuous
Welcome to Visible.
momentum. Nothing signals that commitment more powerfully than visible leadership from the highest levels of our governments. I encourage you to be ambitious in putting together the plan for the increased C10 engagement in international forums at the summit level, as I will continue to urge my colleagues, heads of state and government, to champion this cause in our bilateral and multilateral engagement. High-level advocacy will keep our cause at the forefront of global discussions and help convert support into concrete results. Ladies and gentlemen, as the C10 presses the case for reform, we must also situate it within the broader context of today's global challenges and the quest for a more effective United Nations. The world is facing unprecedented challenges, including but not limited to climate change and climate insecurity, pandemics, persistent geopolitical instability, and rapid technological disruptions. These 21st century challenges demand collective solutions and a Security Council that is more inclusive, more representative of contemporary realities, and not the geopolitical map of 1945. A council stuck in the paradigms of the last century cannot adequately address the crisis of this century. That is where we are. Africa's role in international peace and security is today far more persuasive, is far more passive. Our nations are contributors to UN peacekeeping operations. We are often the host of UN peacekeeping missions. We are active participants in regional, global conflicts, resolution, and preventive diplomacy. African states have proven time and again that we are an indispensable partner in sustaining international peace and security. Our voice must therefore count where it matters, at the United Nations Security Council table. As the coordinator of C10, I wish to reaffirm Sierra Leone's unwavering commitment to this noble cause. My government will continue to mobilize support at the highest level to promote our shared position at every opportunity to facilitate consensus building among all stakeholders. We recognize that diplomacy is often a long and arduous road, but with unity and resolve, we will keep pressing forward until we gain entrance into the United Nations Security Council. Allow me also to commend the African Union Commission for its steadfast support and to thank all C10 member states, including permanent representatives and your dedicated team in Addis Ababa and New York for your commendable efforts. The progress we have made thus far is the fruit of your dedication and collaboration. You've been instrumental in keeping the spirit of the Ezowini Consensus and Declaration alive, and in amplifying Africa's voice on this issue. As this retreat commences, I urge all of you to reflect deeply, strategize boldly, and be deliberate with a sense of purpose. The outcome of this meeting, which I will entreat you to aptly be called the Freetown Roadmap, should serve not only as a technical guide,